Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf 2.0, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Got His Quirk Too Late? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. If someone were to ask why Midoriya Izuku never stood up for himself, his answer would be somewhere between, "Do you want me to die a slow and painful death?" and "I'd prefer not to be charged for murder before high school." His answer was dangerously close to the later, as he watched his explosive classmate throw his beloved notebook out the classroom window. He had once been friends with Bakugo Katsuki, but since Izuku was quirkless, what little friendship there had been with the blonde fell apart. Izuku still respected his drive, ability, and power, but not so much his personality. He almost wished he could still see his old friend in the same light as before. He had been distracted reminiscing, but Izuku knew that Bakugo had said something particularly brutal. If the pale faces of his followers were anything to go by, at least. Before he could guess or ask what had been said, the group was gone. Probably to the arcade or cafe if Izuku knew anything about their habits. Sighing, he hauled himself to his feet. He could cherish the lack of a charred uniform on the way home. Right now he needed to get his bag and head home before his mom. And so he did. Izuku's hands shook as he gathered up his backpack and the luckily few scattered supplies. He dropped a pencil repeatedly and felt his eye twitch in annoyance. Kicking the pencil under a nearby desk, he slipped the filled bag over his shoulders. As he left the classroom, he took a deep breath. His hands steadied a little bit, and the dull burn in his eyes softened. Now he was ready to head out. After retrieving his soaked notebook from the koi pond, blurred graphite included, Izuku continued his trek. It was only when he was around halfway through a shadowy underpass that he realized he'd taken the longer route. He stopped, trying to decide whether to continue or turn back. Izuku's decision was made for him as he was rather violently startled from his thoughts by the loud impact of a sewer lid slamming into the wall behind him, only a few inches from his ankle. Small mercies, he thought, noting the cracked concrete where the metal had hit. Shaking, he turned to see what had caused the scare. A surprised huff of air escaped him and a subconscious step backward followed. A looming, swaying, murky mass stared at him from the partial shadowing of the cement half-tube they both occupied. What little light managed to get into the underpass glinted off of it, and caught onto floating eyes and teeth. The smell of trash and mud was faintly reminiscent of Dagoba Beach, but so much stronger. It burns the back of Izuku's throat as the thing bubbles with laughter. It is not good laughter. His ears were ringing, a shrill noise that covered up whatever the sludge was saying. He could make a close guess at least, as the now classified villains surged towards him. Izuku turned aggressively on his heel, bounding towards the long route with a speed he didn't know he had. Sunlight had only just barely grazed his face when cold overwhelmed what little warmth the exposure had provided. His already aching ankle was yanked backward, throwing him off balance and onto the slimy ground. Dirty green and shadow washed over him, reminding him of contaminated waves. His body treated it as such, eyes and mouth instinctively sealing shut even as his sinuses burn with a foreign substance. He just has to hold his breath until the water passes. Something in his chest started to burn, probably his lungs. Or maybe my ribs, he thinks as the villain starts to twist and squeeze him. Either way, his mind was feeling fuzzy and he felt increasingly tired. Izuku is pretty sure that's not good, but he's not sure over the buzzing fuzz coating his thoughts. His last bit of air had just been squished from his lungs when he was suddenly aware of being thrown to the pavement. He both felt and heard his skin scrape against the opposing surface. It took both him and his body a moment to adapt to the fact that he was free, which meant Izuku could breathe. He laid on the ground in wonder at the fact before muscle memory slammed open the door to his lungs, and forced his lungs to heave to make up for the lost time. Izuku breathed in oxygen like a dehydrated man to water, desperately. One breath caught on something deep in his throat, and another, slower breath confirmed. A snotty, congested sound was produced when he listened to the third one. His throat cringed. And by that he means to throw up. Exceedingly close to his scraped hands. When Izuku's body finally stops convulsing, he starts coughing. He takes another minute after just to recatch what his lungs had only just regained. Then he opens his eyes. Regret. Izuku's stomach twists and his throat tightens at the disgusting sight of a greenish puddle, accessorized with bits and chunks of half-digested rice. Goodbye lunch. His body tingles in phantom sensations from the incident that could only have been a few minutes ago. Izuku finally looks fully up, head spinning as he does, to see what happened. Or rather, All Might, in all his glory, awkwardly crouches a few feet away, shifting through a pair of grocery bags. Izuku watches in numb shock as he pulls out 2 liters of soda bottles with a loudly whispered, He personally doesn't know what is happening and slightly wonders if that lack of air is starting to kick in a bit harder. This is easily hallucination-worthy. All Might empties the bottles, shaking them impatiently as Izuku stays weakly kneeling off to the side. He doesn't move even after the symbol of peace has finished scooping his attacker into the soda bottles. Izuku stays dizzily in place and wondering if this peculiar encounter is a falsehood, and struggles to stay awake. All Might secures both of the bottles, twisting the caps on as tight as they will go, before turning to Izuku. With his non-consensually slime-styled hair and shaking body, he doubts he is the reassuring sight that most heroes would hope for. The large hero took a few careful steps forward, unsure if the boy would lash out and cause more harm. It was hard to tell with the hazy eyes and no visible sign of a quirk. But that was an unneeded worry. Izuku's creeping exhaustion, at last, overwhelmed him, one last trembling breath being drawn in beforehand. His body is bowled over with invisible force, and he falls bonelessly sideways. All Might's panicked face is the last, blurry thing Izuku sees as he fully gives in to the pulling at his eyelids. Izuku's eyes flutter open a few minutes later to a gentle slapping at his face. He still felt like he'd been run over by a truck, and nearly fell asleep when the sensation stopped. The only reason he hadn't was the booming voice too close to his ears and his bag being dropped onto his lap. Of course, his books had tilted perfectly to jab him, as life does. Izuku didn't fully realize he was sitting up until All Might handed him his now torn and dirted soggy notebook. The texture was deplorable and he wanted to throw it far away, but he instead held it close to his chest. It was near impossible to process the happenings in front of him, through the drowsiness and confusion and leftover panic, but Izuku managed to grasp the fact that All Might had made a call. He nearly laughed aloud during it. All Might's hands were just too big for that phone. Izuku was carefully given a piece of paper stolen from his notebook sometime after the call had finished, before the number 1 hero waved goodbye and leaped into the sky with the contained villain. When his thoughts had finally slowed and cleared enough for focus, Izuku brought the somehow dry page up tilted towards the light. All Might's autograph was written large over the page, almost going off of it, in bold English with a small doodle in the top right corner. Below the name was much smaller, Messier writing. Izuku's eyes were still considerably unfocused, but he could still make out most of the words. Something, message me on my fan site. Okay then. He whispers to himself. It echoes sharply around him in the underpass, but he's more focused on the unsolved writing to do more than jump a little. Izuku spends something around 15 minutes staring down the page before he gives up. He starts carefully separating the tacky pages from each other in his notebook, hoping it will help him regain a bit of awareness. And he wanted to do it before the pages dry together. Once finished, Izuku takes another look at the note, but still cannot make out the first few sentences. Grumbling to himself, Izuku stands. If All Might needed him to come in for questioning, he could call the house somehow. He was too tired and aching to decipher that mess of mighty writing right now, so he resumes his long walk home. Surviving a villain encounter, meeting your idol, and then getting to go home and rest? A lovely thought, but an unfortunately cancelled one. Izuku's attention is caught by a series of large, fiery explosions in the near distance. His feet move on learned instinct, all senses enraptured by the smoke. He's soon jogging, ignoring the faraway ache in his legs and feet, with notebook in hand and a pencil so soon to follow. The scene surrounded by people and leaking smoke is just within sight when Izuku is roughly pulled into an alley, a disrupted reflection of where the scene is taking place. In only a few moments he is dragged deeper and deeper into the catacombs of the city. His backpack is torn from his already bruised shoulders, and his held items are soon to follow. Izuku is slammed into an uneven brick wall by yet another looming figure. He didn't think he was that short, was he? Or is it just because he's afraid that his recent attackers seem bigger? He forcefully shifts his focus to his current predicament, shoving away the still vivid memories from a short while ago. Izuku couldn't completely see whoever it was, but of the options there were to choose from, he was guessing they weren't a friendly individual. This was made even more evident by the situation. From what he can feel through his uniform, his aggressor had some sort of mutant quirk. The texture felt like scales, and the hands radiated cold. Reptile quirk then, most likely. Izuku's theory is confirmed as a scaled hand lashes him across the face, claws catching slightly on freckles splattered across his cheeks. When the figure speaks, it's in a raspy high tone that is obviously trying to be consciously changed. "Stop muttering. You're creepy enough with those eyes." "My eyes?" They slap him again. What did I literally just say? Their L's rattle and the S's catch, but they still keep a completely flat voice despite the slight cringe Izuku felt. Izuku stays especially quiet after that, breathing slowly through his mouth. The only sound is the scraping of something on the ground. He's not sure if it's a weapon or part of the person. Something abruptly catches against the skin of his shoulder and he yelps. When he looks, he discovers what he can only describe as a quill. Similar to a porcupine quill, but much bigger and a solid dark shade. Izuku tugs his shoulder curiously and hisses when skin pulls with fabric. Not an easy escape then. The cold hands make a return as his left shoulder is pressed firmly to the wall before receiving a repeat of the other. This quill catches more and Izuku feels warm slide down his back. "Now you can't go squeak on me," they say mostly to themselves before turning to grab his bag. It's only solidly confirmed that the figure is a villain to Izuku when they pull out every bill and coin from his plain wallet. Anger flares in his chest as they shove the money messily into large breathe pockets. The money wasn't even for Izuku's own use. It was from his mom for groceries that week, which ground the anger even more deeply and firmly into his core. He choked on something warm and dry. The villain only spared a glance before continuing to rummage through his bag. Izuku had thought it was a sob at first because his eyes and nose burned too, but he changed his mind when he saw the newly altered shadows casting across the alley. When he turned his head, the shadows flickered with it. Where was the light coming from? Startled from his thieving by the moving light, the villain turns to observe the source. Greenish light filtered from Izuku's throat, pale through the skin, but still incredibly bright. When he opened his mouth to question what the staring was for, smoke and flickers green leaked into the air. Izuku coughed around the unfamiliar feeling, flames sneaking out with the propelled air. He felt something flake down his back, and the wall started to shift. Izuku looked first and the villain tilted slightly on one foot to look too. The once uneven brick wall was even more so, as it melted. Red-orange pooled around Izuku's feet, and his shoes sizzled along with the fabric along his back. Izuku's shoulders slump without his control as the quills come loose, smelling like bitter burnt hair as they smolder. The villain takes a step back, and Izuku suddenly has an idea. His back isn't burning against the superheated bricks, so logically his hands shouldn't either. He scoops a handful of melty rock off the wall with a straight face and stares down the thief. "You can either give me back my money or help me find out if this stuff causes third-degree burns. I'm guessing burnt keratin doesn't smell or feel nice." The held brick hasn't solidified at all, Izuku notes as he holds it out for the villain to see. Solid black eyes stare at either him or the molten substance. He's honestly not too sure, and the villain shakes their head slowly. They pull all the crinkled money from their pockets, long claws hooking on the fabric, and shove it into his bag along with what things fell out. The bag is unceremoniously thrown towards his feet and the villain takes a running jump at an unmelted wall. They scale it easily, and within moments they're out of sight. White scrape marks the only remnant of their existence in the damaged alley. Izuku stands there, a liquid version of the wall in his hand, shoes melted to the pavement and uniform smoking. His shoulders twinge in agony, but he is more than a bit distracted. He might just have a quirk. I might just have a quirk. He echoes. He has no idea how he is going to explain this to anyone, especially his mother. Izuku walks away from the puddle leaking from the wall and slumps against the opposite. He pulls his bag to him, confirms all of his money is in fact there and continues to sit. A popping comes from his hands, and the quills remain lodged in his skin. And that is how Izuku is found by the next pro-hero to stumble upon him. Name: Viridescent Pyrokinesis. Basis: Izuku can produce green flames from his mouth. The flames are fueled by excess copper in his body, hence the green fire instead of average. However, the spark of the flames comes from flammable liquids in his stomach and gases in his lungs. Production can involve both the gases and liquids or just one depending on the type of flame being produced. When the copper mixes with these starters, a combustion reaction is produced. Flames can also be started on his arms and hands due to a flammable oil that is part of his skin, but it has to start from his mouth to prevent damage. If attempting to start a fire straight from his pores, blood will leak to provide the copper, causing bruising and in bad cases blisters or gashes. Smoke is also produced along with the fire, and toxicity depends purely on the intensity of the flames. Izuku's body warms to high temperatures when he uses his quirk, the highest recorded being able to melt iron like butter. Luckily, Izuku is fireproof. When Aizawa Shota decided to patrol around Mizudafu, he did not expect to stumble upon a fiery hostage scene, where the present pros were doing absolutely nothing, with the excuse of not being suited for the situation. He had shaken his head at the ignorant fools, before swinging in and landing a kick on the villain's eyes. He couldn't do much to stop the villain, they having a mutant quirk and all, but he managed to get the hostage to stop making explosions. All Might had appeared then, basically slapping the villain into a wall. Aizawa had then tried to sneak away to avoid the now rabid and growing press but was stopped by an officer trying to grab his sleeve. He was too tired for this. He made his escape leaping up a wall whilst an older officer gave the newbie notice. No, that is not a vigilante. That is an underground hero. Yes, I'm sure. Once it was obvious that the hostage, a snappy blonde teen, was safe, Aizawa was ready to go home and sleep. So when he saw the air quivering and distorted from a massive amount of heat above an alley up and across the street, he had rubbed his aching eyes and hopped a few roofs to investigate with little more than an annoyed huff. Sometimes life just decides to be this way. Oh well, it's not like he can just leave it. Aizawa Shota was expecting an oil drum with some sort of absurd quirk-made fire in it. Or maybe a piece of flaming rubble from the earlier scene. He was not expecting a glassy-eyed child with impaled shoulders. Therefore, he had panicked a bit. The kid was slumped across from a melted wall and looked of similar age to his students. Of course he had worried, he was a teacher, and a DMN responsible one if nothing else. With a little less grace than usual, Aizawa jumped down into the alley, careful to avoid the orange leakage of the wall. Izuku glanced up a bit from his hands at the sound but doesn't react further. He prods at the gooey stuff in his hands. Would it be correct to call it lava? Footsteps echo sharply for being small and cautious, Izuku notes. Either steel-soled shoes or a large person. He takes a glance at the new person. Correct. Aizawa pauses mid-careful step. What? Izuku jolts before chuckling. Oh, I said it aloud. He looks fully at Aizawa, reeling weakly in surprise. Izuku knows that outfit. Eraser head. It's Aizawa's turn to reel at the raspy and tired but excited voice. It's incredibly rare for people to recognize him, even with all the new websites honoring heroes like him. He takes a closer look at the kid in front of him. Green hair and eyes, scraped hands and arms, and a fire-eaten uniform. Obviously a quirk-related incident here, possibly the boy's own if the substance in his hands is any clue. He's shaking too, Aizawa notes. Yeah. You okay, kid? Izuku shrugs with a wince. A glare is directed towards the embedded quills. As okay as I can be with these and being attacked twice today. Aizawa walks closer, crouching to get a closer look. 3 pencils taped together would probably be the closest comparison to the size, and he could see his reflection in the black surface. From what he could tell, it caught enough to stay firmly. That alone would need stitches. Rate the pain for me on a scale of 10. Izuku's brows scrunch as he thinks, shifting his shoulders slightly. 5 or 7, I think? Aizawa nearly wheezes. Most adults, even with a car on top of them, would say something like 5 without thinking. This kid had tested it and said the number with absolute certainty. He had been mumbling something about temperature and melting points when Aizawa jumped down. That told Aizawa that the kid was probably hit to or close to the bone and had a high pain tolerance. Great. I doubt you should or can stand, so if you could drop the lava that would be helpful. Izuku smiles awkwardly at the hero before pouring the melt on the ground as far from them as he could. Some sticks and he wipes it on the wall sheepishly. Aizawa leans down, carefully slipping one arm under the charred breathes and one between the wall and the kid's back. He had expected the kid to weigh more, but it felt like picking up a large cat at most. As he was picked up, Izuku swiped his bag from the ground. He positioned it on his lap and was jabbed in the stomach yet again. Right in the bruise? Fine, really? Aizawa laughed quietly as the held kid extensively cussed out his bag under his breath. Instead of taking the normal way home, Aizawa walked like an average individual. While he made his way back to the street, Aizawa asked his cargo some more questions. Are you bleeding? I think my quirk cauterized it. That's good, but you're not sure? The only reason Aizawa asked was that at this age, most knew the effects of their quirks. He nearly panics again when the kid frowns bitterly and speaks in a sad tone, words catching in his irritated throat. I only just got it. Aizawa ponders this before sighing. He'll have to keep an eye on this one, somehow. Late blooming quirks are always stronger and more dangerous. Be careful with it. By the time the pair reaches the nearest hospital, Izuku had fallen asleep. Aizawa could feel his lungs rattle against his arms, so he hurried his steps further. One of the quills pressed uncomfortably against his upper arm, and he wouldn't admit it aloud, but Aizawa was glad to set the boy upon the offered stretcher. One of the nurses handed him the singed bag before rushing back over to one side of the stretcher. The pair of nurses hurried down a hallway off to the side, and the doors brushed metallically together behind them. Aizawa allowed himself to sigh harshly at this point. He didn't even know the name. Yet, he had a school bag on a chair next to him that might. Despite his hesitance, Aizawa pulled the bag onto his lap to look. Bakugo Katsuki was a little more than displeased. First, he had been held hostage like a small child, and then he got rescued by a hobo-looking man. At least All Might had appeared. That angered him too. The number one hadn't even stayed to praise him like the others. Now he was stuck in a stuffy hospital room because he severely damaged his arms. Sure, they ached and were burned, but that was nothing. As such, he made sure to mutter, stupid medical fuckers, every time someone walked by his door. At the perfect volume for them to hear. He shouted at the first person to walk in, who was, conveniently, his mother. Brat, shut the hell up. The next thing I want to be charged for is a public disturbance or some shit. Bakugo rolled his eyes at that. So she says as she herself yells. His father walked in on the two aggressively whispering curses at each other. Aizawa didn't have to search far for the mystery name, finding it on the front of the first notebook he pulls. Midoriya Izuku? Above the name, he notes, is a title longer than the average class. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. He reads aloud. Out of curiosity and slight suspicion, he flips through it. He is soon amazed. From the recently debuted Mount Lady, to old heroes, to what seems to be classmates. Midoriya has it all, and this is the 13th one. Aizawa had only skimmed each crispy page, but he could see the notes were detailed. Fueling the now burning curiosity, he plunges back into the bag in search of more. Aizawa finds number 12 and class notebooks. He starts immediately reading it thoroughly. About halfway through he finds his own file. A messy, but detailed doodle highlights his costume in surprising accuracy. Questions and jottings line the right side. Aizawa is impressed. With that, he flips to the next page. There he finds a slightly charred page that is far more detailed than any page so far. And there's a note in the top left corner stating, Part 3. Bakugo Katsuki. The page reads, Quirk, Explosion. This is achieved through his sweat, which is primarily composed of nitroglycerin. The page continues on in brief notings, before the wall of text starts. It's there that Aizawa sees the writing gets shaky, as well as the most burned. Some of the writing is unreadable there, being either covered or badly smudged. Aizawa is intrigued and concerned. His reading is interrupted by the same nurse that had gifted him the bag reappearing. "Sir, the boy you brought in is now in surgery. We have no clue of his identity currently, so may we have your number for when he wakes up?" Aizawa closes the notebook and points to the cover. "His name is Midoriya Izuku, but yes, I'd like to have you call me when he wakes up. I need his report after all." The nurse nods his head and holds over a page of paper. After writing down his name and number, Aizawa leaves for home. Might as well spend some time, seeing as he lives close by. Upon opening his door, he is greeted by no less than 4 meows and a questioning noise. "Hey Hitoshi, I'm home." Inko had been working her daily 10-hour shift when she received the call. She knew it had to be important, as her phone was set to only alert her of emergency calls at work. To avoid fainting too badly, she shut down her lane and sat down before answering. "Is this Midoriya Inko?" "Yes, and this is?" A staticky cough comes across the line. Sorry, this is the Mizudafu General Hospital. I'm calling for your son, Midoriya Izuku?" "Yes, that's him." Inko's panic spikes as she hears the slight inhale. "He is currently in surgery at our facility for 2 cases of impalement in his shoulders and fractured ribs. Along with that, we also believe there is a buildup of liquid in his lungs, there's a large amount of bruising, and he's running a high fever. A hero brought him in." Inko takes a deep breath, calming herself. It could have been far worse. "I'm on my way." Aizawa is greeted with the sight of fluffy violet hair peeking out over the arm of the couch, and 3 pairs of eyes gazing from on it. A quiet bleh is produced as a main sin drags himself over the hair and arm to hop down. "Hello Nepeta, enjoying your heating pad?" He receives a meow and a blank green gaze before the cat trots away with wispy tail held high. "Huh, even you can't please him." Aizawa turns back to the sight of Hitoshi on the couch, still holding 2 cats. "Duh, he's a deity we are not to question. You stated this yourself." Hitoshi chuckles and takes a moment to breathe before answering. Yes, I did. Anyways, anything interesting happen?" Aizawa groans before flopping back first onto the opposite couch. He covers his eyes with his left arm. "That bad? I found this kid in a melted alley. A late bloomer Quirk nonetheless, and he was impaled in both shoulders. And he has these analysis notebooks. I would have thought he had analysis quirk if not for the lava he was holding. He was planning on becoming a hero quirkless, and now he has a quirk. I fear for whatever school he enrolls in." Hitoshi grins widely at his from his position across the coffee table. "He's totally going to enroll in UA." "Oh shit, he will, won't he?" "Yep." Aizawa rolls over to reach for his discarded phone. "They'll call me once he wakes up after surgery. I need to get his recounting." Hitoshi tilts his head, blurry over the focus of Aizawa's vision. "Why were you telling me this?" "Oh wait dash." Aizawa peeks up over his phone from the loading screen of a game. "That's right. I want you to come with unless you'd prefer to not. And I'm going to steal one of your hoodies for Midoriya. His uniform was absolutely a mess, and we both know hospital gowns are evil." "Yeah. And you suspect he'll under-exaggerate, don't you?" Aizawa grumbles with a sigh. "Unfortunately, I could practically smell his recklessness and I hadn't even gotten his name at that point. He is blessed with a cat thrown onto him for his troubles." Hitoshi laughs at the losing tune of his game, of which had been, of course, cat-themed. "For that, we're taking the mint cat one." "No, that's my 3rd favorite. Be glad it's not the Nikoatsume one. You are a cruel and torturous being. Hisashi would have taken all of your hoodies had it been him. Be glad for this lucky turn of universal favor. You speak the truth. Fine, you're forgiven, caffeine addict." "As if you have anything to say for yourself, Mr. Pure Black, like my soul." Inko is directed to the nearest waiting room after she explained her panicked presence to the front desk. The room is fairly empty, with just a few scattered people either asleep or on their phones. She couldn't have been stressing in the room for more than 10 minutes when the next people enter. Both are holding large travel mugs with a cat pattern differing only in color. Inko can smell the coffee even before they sit a few seats over from her. The shorter one, obviously a teen, holds a folded hoodie. Pastel green and also cat-themed, Inko notes. His purple hair slightly clashes with the yellow jacket he's wearing. Clad in a black jumpsuit and sporting a large multi-piece scarf, the other reminded her of someone. Inko thought over it, before slightly startling upon the realization. Sitting a few seats over from her was the underground hero Izuku had been talking about a few weeks ago, and one of the growing few he didn't have an autograph from. Now both Midoriyas were anxious in nature, and their shared stuttering large sign of that. But once they're determined to do something, there is no possible way to stop them without serious bodily harm, or without them purposely backing off. And Inko Midoriya just so happened to be most inspired by her son. Hitoshi felt a stare directed in his direction and looked up to see the lady a few seats over looking through him. Or rather, at his dad. Normally, this would concern him for multiple reasons. Then he spotted the slightly wrinkled piece of paper in her hand, the accompanying pen shaking slightly in her other. It would so seem Hitoshi is getting slight revenge for earlier. He nudged the man beside him before saying quietly, "Hey Dad, I believe you have a code 9. Aizawa jerked slightly, meeting Hitoshi's eyes with disbelief. A code 9? You're joking? Hitoshi's growing grin proved otherwise. Aizawa peeked over his son's hair. It was Inko's turn to flinch as he raised her head. She believes, met her nervous gaze. She gave a shaky smile. At the questioning tilt of both's heads and the provided, "Well," Inko spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you, but my son analyzes heroes and collects their autographs as well. If it isn't too much trouble, could I please have yours, Eraserhead?" Hitoshi snickered behind it. And as Aizawa went shock still. After a few moments of silence on both sides, he nudged at the shocked man. "Come on, Dad, sure it's a rare occurrence, but be glad it's not happening in the crowded bookstore like with Mike last week." The noting of the event had a huff of air in response. Aizawa straightened up a bit from his slumped position. "Sure." Upon waking, Izuku was stuck between being displeased or the opposite. For one, he had a quirk now. But on the other side, everything hurt. He couldn't even lift his shoulders, but he was glad that they were numb despite his attempts. Izuku could feel various other spots of bandaging but didn't bother looking at them. The door clicked and creaked open, revealing a nurse. He was whispering notes to himself, and when he peered up he met Izuku's eyes. He immediately started speaking, something about early waking and surprising quirk side effects. Izuku coughed into his hand. The nurse stopped speaking and announced going to retrieve those waiting for him. He provided a thumbs up, knowing his throat was still sore without speaking. Midoriya Izuku's family and friends? Inko stood at the call, folding the autographed paper into a small square before sliding it into her pocket. Turning to bid farewell, she paused at the mirroring of herself. "You're the one who brought Izuku in? You're the problem child's parent? You both didn't guess?" Talking outside of his door dragged Izuku from his mental analysis of his injuries and quirk. He was already staring at the door when it opened, so he made instant eye contact with his mother. She somehow essentially teleported to his bedside and he embraced her as much as one could with post-stabbing of their shoulders. Inko pulled back, tears in her eyes, and Izuku opened his mouth to speak. He was interrupted by a mouthful of pastel green tossed at him. Snickering greeted, he struggled to pull it off, but he managed with a few complications. Hitoshi cringed slightly when he saw the landing point, but he had to laugh when the bandaged green head struggled. Like a cat tangled in a blanket. Once the boy was rid of his temporary confines, he glared. Hitoshi felt deep in his being that he'd best apologize. So he did. "Ah heck, I was aiming more for your chest. Sorry about that." Izuku gazed at the lanky teen, searching for sarcasm. He smiled once he found none. "It's fine, it seems as though you didn't do it on purpose." Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the final presence. He offered a polite nod to the hero before holding up his hand the best he can towards the other teen. He has to walk to the side of the bed to complete the handshake but doesn't look bothered. In fact, he tilts his head slightly in the pause before Izuku's next speaking point. Midoriya Izuku? Hitoshi is proud of only freezing for a few moments. Shinso Hitoshi. They manage to say, "Nice to meet you," in perfect sync. Both guardians hold back laughter at the shocked look on the pair's faces. Naomasa Tsukachi was just about to start an interrogation when he received the call. As the only number that could reach his personal cell during work hours, Toshinori is, of course, the one to answer when he picks up. "Hey Naomasa, I have a situation of sorts." Naomasa gives an affirmative hum as he motions for another officer to start the interrogation, followed by a mouthed, "Sorry," and point to his phone. A teenager was just attacked over by that underpass that's by the old newspaper company. I have to deliver the villain to the nearest station, but I'm leaving him with a note to wait. Toshinori dash. Yeah, I really need to go before this villain wakes up. I really do not want to shovel him into containment again. The kid will be waiting, don't worry. He's just a bit shaken up and bruised. And with that, Toshinori hangs up. Naomasa proceeds to hold his temple and stare at the floor. And he's such an effective hero. I know he's underground, but I would kill for some Eraserhead merch. Exactly. I've been telling him that too, with the excuse of just having the designs have different costumes, or being minimalist. But he says, Shinso clears his throat for dramatic tension, "Hitoshi, that wouldn't work." Izuku chuckles behind his hand, trying to avoid the slight glare coming from the dark-clad of adult pair. "That's a perfect imitation." Shinso nods, adding a stage-whispered, "I know, right?" Inko laughs into her hands softly along with her son. Naomasa's panic is practically solid in the air, Sansa notes as they pull up to the empty underpass. He turns, ears flicking with slight residual anxiousness. Maybe someone else saw him? We could check the local hospitals. And Eraser was patrolling around here too, right? Naomasa deflates, tension spilling from him as much as it can. He nods and turns to smile thankfully at his partner. "Yeah, that'd be a good start. Can you call him? He still hasn't given me his number." Sansa smiles right back, before returning to the car to retrieve his phone. Bakugo Mitsuki is filling a tiny plastic cup with water when she hears a familiar gasp and, looking up, spots a familiar shade of green. "Mitsuki? What are you here for? Is Masaru okay? Katsuki?" Mitsuki smiles at the waterfall of worries, before walking forward to dispense a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We're all okay, the brat just messed up his hands a bit from a villain attack. What about you?" Inko laughs weakly. "The same happened to Izuku, just a little more." She pauses, intense. "He got pulled into 2 attacks today from what he said, and got hurt in both." Mitsuki's breath catches, and she pulls the smaller mother into a hug. "The soft brat's okay though? Still tough as ever." Inko's laugh is stronger this time, but more wet, catching on repressed sobs. She nods tearily against the blonde's shoulder. "Yeah, he's still tough. He was complaining about how he wasn't able to write about the 2 villains because his hands are numb. So his new friend is helping him write it down now, word for word." Mitsuki is about to respond, but a door opens with a loud click. "Dear, are you all right?" "Oh, is that Inko?" Masaru walks over from his leaning out the door, voice soft intriguement and worry. She points towards the door one away from theirs. "Soft brat is here too." The secondary Bakugo to enter the hall is interrupted by the third, final and smallest Bakugo. His mouth is open, swear halfway said, when he spots Inko. "And Inko? What dash?" Masaru speaks before the second hospital shouting match can start. "Izuku's here too." Katsuki's eyes furrow at the information, glaring at the directed-to door. Yet another Bakugo is interrupted with another door. Out peeks Aizawa, face blank as he speaks. He holds up a few bills and says, "The problem children hunger and say they'll claim my goggles if I do not retrieve sustenance of the sugary kind." They said it in unison like earlier and it's absolutely terrifying. Inko finally pulls away from Mitsuki, nodding solemnly. "It really is. We've united the 2 halves of a chaotic deity, somehow. We best offer them sacrifices before Izuku plans out pranks for the whole year if he hasn't already. May he have mercy on us. That Quirk has way too much pranking potential, especially combined with Shinsu's. I fear for the loose stones and scrap metal near our home. The Bakugo's heads swivel with each sentence, sporting similar looks of bewilderment. That is until Katsuki processes the first before last one. What do you mean he has a quirk? He says, completely calm, rage turning to Dries. Inko turns to him, gleefully. Though the attacks were horrible, Izuku gained a quirk from the second one. It's a strange mix of both mine and Dash. Katsuki's hearing fades out. Izuku developed a quirk. Late developing quirks always are incredibly powerful and dangerous, if their old research was correct. Katsuki had been enthused by the prospect when they were younger, but now, however? Now it was practically a direct challenge. The adults say something along the lines of feeding the two halves with a great deal of laughter and head to the vending machines down the hall. Tall and shadowy stares at him for a moment before heading off in the opposite direction, towards the bathrooms. It takes less than 5 seconds for Katsuki to make his way to the door, but he waits until the mystery man has disappeared to enter. Katsuki had been expecting the nerd to have light wrappings around his arms, like him, with a few scattered band-aids maybe. He was not expecting the pain medication bag hanging beside the bed, the oxygen tanks and tubes, or just how much thicker the bandages looked on the smaller middle schooler. Bakugo Katsuki was especially not expecting the flash of pain that crossed across Izuku's face as he shifted away from the person at his bedside to look at the door. He could spot bandages underneath the green hoodie he was sporting too. 2 pairs of eyes stared at him, one the most familiar shade of green and one purple. One pair both relieved and frightened, the other curious and calculating. For the first time in a long time, Katsuki takes a step backward at the subconscious impulse triggered by deep-rooted fear. Disregarding my mistakes detailed above, enjoy the chapter. There might be another one tonight with how fast I typed this one. Also, thank you so much for all the comments. I now have the plot planned out to the USJ, somewhat. It might be a while. The awkward stare down, luckily, is soon interrupted. Katsuki's foot bumps against the now closed door, and, like convenient magic, a phone starts to ring on one of the 2 bedside tables. Katsuki notes that it's an unfamiliar one, lacking the plain green one Izuku sported. Unwillingly sported more specifically, as his old All Might one had been charred in one of their previous encounters. The purple-haired teen sets down an all-too-familiar brand of notebook, tucking a mechanical pencil behind his ear. He leans slightly over the hospital bed, posture obviously stiff and cautious as to not hurt the currently bedridden Izuku. Katsuki had at first thought that the black case was plain, assuming it belonged to the unidentified adult from earlier. That thought was disregarded as Izuku grabbed the phone with a slight wince and handed it to the other. On the back of the case was a messy pattern of white cat silhouettes, doing various activities. Katsuki should really know better than to be surprised by these kinds of little details by now, seeing as he once walked in on a horror movie marathon at the Midoriya household. Shinso hummed as he took in the caller ID, answering after giving a slight chuckle at Bakugo's expense. Some people were just far too expressive. Izuku had to tilt his head at a strange angle to look at the case, as Shinso leaned up against the bedside table. It didn't take him long to piece together the situation, laughing at what Shinso must have realized as well. Bakugo looked confused and slightly offended. Shinso answered the caller with a drawn-out, "Hey. Hey, detective man. Let me guess, looking for a stray kid that Eraser likely encountered? It was Toshinori leaving behind a victim at a scene again, I'd bet?" Izuku caught a distraught sputtering through the speakers, and someone laughing quietly in the background. His gaze drifted back to the blonde, still standing with his heel to the door. Before Izuku could warn him of his sudden realization, Bakugo is falling forward with the opening of the door. Aizawa had been expecting one of 2 things. 1, the explosion kid was actually a friend that had bad control of his quirk. Or 2, the kid was a bully to Midoriya due to his previous quirkless status. His bet was on the secondary theory, though he wished for the first to be the truth. Walking in, he was imagining the positions that the children may be in, be it a negative or positive interaction. Aizawa's hand rested uneasily on his ever-present capture weapon as he opened the door. Of all his paranoid guessing, he had failed to ponder the blending of the possible interactions. He could only watch in mute surprise as the smallest Bakugo fell forward. Shinso paused mid-sentence, watching with a similar reaction to his guardian. Izuku actually jolted forward a bit, as if to attempt to grab his classmate. Aizawa's reflexes kicked in just in time to prevent further injury to any of the teens, capture weapons springing forward. Shinso resumed the call barely a moment later. "Yeah, Eraser is here now. Gimme a sec." Without further care, Shinso masterfully tossed the phone into Aizawa's not quite a scarf. Lazily stretching, he shifted back onto the edge of the hospital bed, retrieving the notebook from the sheets and the pencil from behind his ear. He looked to Izuku, pencil tilted inquisitively. After a moment, he carefully pulls Izuku back into his past, more comfortable position. Katsuki was unsure of what he was witnessing. Still in moderate shock from his near embrace of a concussion, he stood up straight to relieve the pressure from his arm. Izuku was blinking more than needed, obviously trying to process the unneeded drama that had just occurred. Sighing, he seemingly gave up on that wish halfway through, choosing to shift to face Shinso more. The pair resumes writing about Izuku's second villain encounter. Shinso writes it carefully, obviously making sure it's word for word, only pausing to provide questions. They're disturbingly in sync, despite being new acquaintances. That's a term that is not going to hold for more than another hour or two, the other occupants subconsciously note. By the time Katsuki has somewhat recovered from the returning panic from before, the page on the unanimously dubbed spine villain is complete. The two analysts relentlessly start on the next topic, of such being Izuku's quirk. Katsuki steps away from the door, sitting in a chair by the door. Izuku's eyes flicker over to him for a moment, but he doesn't stop speaking to his new companion. Aizawa watches this with a blank face, despite the pride bubbling inside. From what he can tell, Midoriya is still nervous around Bakugo, but Hitoshi is making it better by distracting him. He catches the slight grin Hitoshi sends to him in a pause between questions, before he retrieves his phone from the layers of his capture weapon. "Yeah, I'm here." "Sorry, Shinso just threw my phone into my scarf again." "Yes, his aim is getting better." Naomasa deflates as he hangs up the call, handing the phone back to his partner. Sansa holds back a snicker before it can escape, patting Naomasa's shoulder. "Well, at least Eraser found him before he could encounter a third, eh?" Naomasa stiffens up again, near instantly. He w's around to stare incredulously at Sansa. "What are you thinking now?" Sansa asks, amusement weaved into his words. "Oh God, Sansa, you've jinxed us. That child is doomed. What have you done?" Sansa leads his endlessly suffering partner back to the car, internally thinking of statistics. It isn't too far off for Naomasa to be correct, unfortunately. Sansa wouldn't be responsible for it though, at least not fully. He can't ignore the intruding chill creeping up his spine despite the afternoon heat, no matter his stance of the theory of bad luck. Dust stirred up with the footsteps, some of it catching in the narrow stripes and dottings of light that managed to sneak past the suspended spider web of pipes overhead. The emerging figure is coated in it once they take a few turns and a number of steps. This particular alleyway is bathed in the late afternoon sun, the particular position of the Earth's star perfect to set it alight. Shigaraki Tamura gazes up and down the warped wall, a calculating smile splitting his face. Another powerful asset never hurts, especially with the rumors circulating. Jiren's rumors are usually correct as well, as they go through a singular checkpoint with the strength to destroy any fake whisper. His red shoes catch slightly on an uneven patch, and he looks down. If the grin grows a bit wider, and if a bead of blood or two begins to string, no one is around to witness it. A puddle of melted brick rests on the other side of the alley, this side warped in a singular, relatively small place. Tashinori had, of course, been expecting the call. Naomasa had sounded disappointed during the call that informed him of the injured teen. By that logic, he was bound to receive a call that was mostly his friends scolding him for an extra dose of paperwork that he caused more than he'd be willing to admit. What he got instead was a text from Naomasa. Two, actually. The second came quickly after, gifting him with the knowledge that the texter was Sansa. Naomasa was apparently passed out, either from nerves or exhaustion. Or in Sansa's words, most likely an unholy mix of the two, if the fresh stack of paperwork on the chief's desk says anything. Feeling guilty, Tashinori decided to help the best he could. Never a good idea, if he wasn't given directions beforehand. Shinso looked up from his reading material at the sound of the door opening. It was becoming a familiar sound, just as him being in this particular room was. Since their meeting, Izuku and Shinso had exchanged numbers. Doing so allowed Shinso to request ahead of time for Izuku to have his notebooks brought in, if it was okay with him. It had turned out to be okay, and the other 10 were brought in by Izuku's mother. Shinso wasn't at all surprised to see the other ones were just as detailed. As Izuku had mentioned, he updates them every year or so to keep them neat and up to date. On his lap, number 6 was open halfway through, practically begging to be continued. He was unfortunately socially required to greet whoever was at the door, however. Shinso could have burst into tears from relief at the sight of someone familiar. Discounting the past 2 days, 3 people had peeked in, looking for someone else. Izuku could relate on that level, he could tell. The last person to peek in had cursed violently before leaving. Izuku had actually nearly burst into tears on the spot, and never had Shinso wanted to shove someone down a flight of stairs more. Besides Bakugo, of course. Drifting back to the subject at hand, Shinso greeted the person peeking in the door before it could grow awkward. If it hadn't already. Tashinori. Hello. The addressed man smiled a bit awkwardly, saying hello back before sitting the nearest seat. He could never get used to the deadpan and blunt ways the Aizawa family would greet people, no matter how close they are. Shinso was smiling slightly at least, though that may be because of the notepad sticking out of his BRST pocket. Tashinori was correct in his guess. Shinso was in fact smiling more at the notepad than his guardian's friend's friend. The teen had jokingly given it to the man with the remark, "Everyone needs an animal-themed notepad. Even Eraser has one, Tashinori." He's almost impressed the scrawny man kept it, despite it being a joke. The notebook of mention was a pastel yellow with a brown border and lines. But most importantly, at the top, it had a resting white rabbit. It gave the notepad a strange shape, but hey, who cares? It's for the aesthetic, not functionality. Tashinori fumbled for the notepad, long fingers catching inconveniently on the pocket. You're here for his report so Naomasa doesn't have to, I'm guessing? Shinso says, jabbing a thumb to his sleeping companion. Tashinori pauses just as he's finally caught proper hold on the notepad, looking at Shinso with a surprised expression. Yes. Shinso waves a hand at him as he turns to shift the pile of notebooks around, pulling a small stack of papers from underneath them. We assumed someone would come for his report, so we wrote it down ahead of time the same day it happened. Midoriya worried if we didn't get it down that day he'd forget something, so he had me write this absolute unit of a report. It's practically an essay. The last part is said slightly under his breath, but Tashinori hears it nonetheless. He wordlessly walks over to take it, scanning through it to delay his temptation to ask invasive questions. Shinso sighs, picking the open notebook back up and grabbing a bookmark from the table behind him without looking. He lightly slides in between the pages, careful not to as much as crinkle them. The bookmarked notebook is set on an open part of the bed before Shinso returns his attention to the waiting adult. Izuku couldn't write it himself because he was impaled in both shoulders. His arms are sore from the shoulders to his fingers. Writing could mess up the wound further. How Shinso could guess what he's thinking from a glance, Tashinori doesn't know. What he does know is that the teen is frightening with that skill of his. He can't wait to see him at UA. Alright, I'll drop this to the station. I'll let you two know if Naomasa has further questions, or anyone else. Have a good afternoon. Tashinori leaves with guilt simultaneously burning and chilling his insides. The weekend passes faster than Izuku expected, and his dismissal further so. He's able to go back to school on Monday, though he didn't have any time to prepare, unlike Bakugo who had a full day. Izuku dreads the possible reactions of his classmates the whole morning. He internally begs his teachers to just shut up for once. The gossip of the office doesn't need to seep into the classroom. Never again. The universe, as usual, Ignores his plead in the same way a cat ignores the pleads of their owner to not decimate their favorite mug. As the class bursts upon his arrival, all Izuku can think of is how lucky he is this happened only a week before the end of middle school. He has at least a little luck on his side, it seems. The class loses interest after the first 2 days, figuring Izuku's quirk must be as plain as his appearance. Especially so, since everyone notices Bakugo pays him no obvious attention. Izuku knows better. When everyone's focused, he can catch Bakugo glancing back at him. He doesn't have enough calm to figure out what the blank looks may mean. The fear of meeting the blonde's eyes is strong as usual, if not more so. Bakugo being so nonchalant compared to his normal personality is horribly unsettling, perhaps more so than being glared at with the heat of firecracker explosions backing it up. The lack of casual rock candy pops is absurdly off-putting as well. Shinso reassures him that this is better than the alternative, but Izuku isn't so sure. Shigaraki watches from the roof of the school as a green-haired teen makes his way home, occasionally peeking over his shoulder at a blonde taking the same route. The street cams had been reliable as ever, and paired with Jiren's sources it was undeniable who the cause of the melted alley was. It was practically a child's puzzle, with it being so simple to fit together the pieces to uncover the mystery. Midoriya Izuku, age 14. Registered as quirkless until last week. Most likely a quirk triggered by extreme emotional distress, if the day's events were any evidence. He could hold molten materials, his body was practically a chemical fire factory. A perfect addition to the league, in Shigaraki's opinion. Sensei had told him it wasn't worth it, since the boy's quirk would likely take a self-destructive route. He had shrugged off the comment, assuming it to be another test of sorts. With a simple text, a portal provides a quick trip to the first step of the plan. Izuku relaxes about halfway through his trek. Bakugo had likely picked up on Izuku's nerves and got annoyed, as he had taken an alternate turn to Izuku. That, or he needed to pick up groceries. Probably the first one, Izuku thinks. He mentally chuckles at the mental image of Bakugo pushing around a cart whilst trying not to yell at fellow customers. Izuku nearly trips over something as he was stuck in his thoughts. He turns back to look after recovering from his stumbling. In the middle of the cracked sidewalk is a black cat, staring up at him with large orange eyes. He looks over it, wondering if the cat has any injuries that prevented it from avoiding his feet. It yawns, sharp teeth catching the light. Izuku crouches down next to it on impulse, close, but leaving enough room for it to escape easily. He holds his hand out shakily, fearing the worst. What he gets is not the worst, in fact, it's pretty great. The cat leans forward to sniff at his knuckles after ending the yawn, whiskers tickling his skin. Izuku nearly falls over when it headbutts his hand, soft fur brushing against the scabby scrapes from the past week. It continues to nuzzle against his hand, leaning forward to lick at the side of his wrist. Izuku's eyes tear up as he reaches to scratch at the cat's chin. The resounding purr is loud enough that it slightly echoes in the empty street. He scratches at its neck, absent-mindedly brushing out some dirt. The cat finally sits fully up, exposing a strange twist to its leg. It walks closer to him, practically climbing up his crouched leg, purring all the while. Izuku goes out on a limb, putting his hands under the cat's front legs to lift it. There is no resistance, and the cat continues to purr even as he fully lifts it and flips it over to cradle it. He cannot hope to even attempt to hide it. Izuku is crying while holding a cat. Full-on crying, interrupted with small bursts of laughs as the cat paws at his face, still purring. That is the backstory for how Izuku ends up smuggling a cat into the nearby store, with two people watching him out of sight. One is confused, and the other a combination of curious and amused. The third party out of sight receives cat pictures, more specifically, the cat being cradled in Izuku's spare jacket. Shinso immediately drags Aizawa over, who notes that the picture is a bit shaky. He's appreciative despite the blurriness. When asked, Izuku simply replied in a butchered version of, "Can't talk." Smuggling cat inside of store to get food. That managed a laugh from Aizawa. It's not long after he watches Midoriya Izuku smuggle an injured cat into a grocery store that Shigaraki hears the sound of multiple pairs of shoes scraping on the asphalt behind him. He turns lazily on his heel, already having guessed who it was. For members of the league were trying to sneak up on him. Toga Himiko curses along with Dabi, although the latter's is quieter. Spinner at least had the decency to look a bit sheepish, as well as Twice. But it was Twice, so he said something contradictory right after. Shigaraki sighed at them and turned back around to watch the Midoriya gather cat essentials. Honestly, if he hadn't grabbed the cat, Shigaraki would have. With at least one finger raised, of course. The others crowd around him, openly curious about what he was doing. Kurogiri said he was planning on recruiting whoever melted that one alley. I heard him talking to Jiren about it too. Toga was enthusiastic. She was obviously as curious as Shigaraki in regards as to who caused it, though not for the same reasons. Wonder who it is, Spinner says, triggering a chain reaction that Shigaraki could do without. Twice pointed out one of the cashiers who had floating hair, with a remark along the lines of their hair looking like a galaxy. Surprisingly, there was no secondary comment. Spinner pointed out someone with their hood up, shoveling over half the store's stock of ramen into a cart far too small for such a task. Dabi pointed out Midoriya, who was fairly close to the window, pondering over a display of cat toys and looking near a panic attack before grabbing one of each type. Shigaraki was slightly impressed, even without the confirmation of it having reasoning. Toga pointed to the blonde who had made Midoriya nervous, who was currently at the self-checkout glaring daggers at the error screen. He didn't take his eyes off of his target, but he gave Dabi a pat of the shoulder before returning his hand to his hoodie pocket. Pure chaos erupted from their forth. Izuku was amazed at how tolerant the cat was, content just to sleep curled up in Izuku's jacket. He didn't have any issues, besides slightly panicking over what type of toys he thought his new cat would like. When all else fails, one of each variety. He spotted Bakugo at the self-checkouts, next to someone meticulously counting their items. Most of it was ramen. A wide gap was produced purposely. Izuku took a long way around to get to the checkout lanes. Along the way, he acquired a notebook with a cat-patterned cover. It was in the cart before he had time to think it over. He wonders if it's weird to write down details about your cat, as he walks to the checkout of someone with an intriguing quirk. Too bad he was already anxious from smuggling in the cat, else he might have had enough courage to ask about it. What is he kidding? No, he wouldn't. Shigaraki watches silently as Midoriya exits the store, walking towards their alley spot. He stops just before it, setting down his bags on the sidewalk. The cat is pulled from his jacket, limp and pliable like a noodle. Midoriya holds the black cat with one arm as he sheds his jacket, folding it messily with one hand before shoving it into his yellow backpack. He shifts the cat so he's cradling it with his opposite arm, and scratches at its chin. The purr sounds like a broken engine, but it makes Midoriya smile blindingly nonetheless. Shigaraki sees Toga and Dabi shield their eyes out of the corner of his. He holds back a snicker. Midoriya flips the friendly feline back over, holding it up to his shoulder hesitantly. Ah, Shigaraki whispers. He'll need both hands to properly carry the bags, and his backpack is full. And it's hot outside, so he can't keep wearing the jacket lest he risk heatstroke. It doesn't take much more prompting from the freckled teen for the cat to curl around his shoulders like a scarf. Midoriya crouches carefully, shifting the cat carefully to put his backpack back on. He leans slightly forward to grab the grocery bags, arms twitching up every other moment. Finally, he grabs the bags off the ground with no incidents from the cat. He stands back up, holding the heavier bags on an arm and the lighter ones in hand. A chunk of the League of Villains watches as Midoriya takes a hesitant step forward, and then another. He is soon far down the street, too busy rubbing his cheek against the cats to notice his followers. Shigaraki decides to delay recruitment for another day. Meanwhile, the previously mentioned cashier is trying to explain to Bakugo that the error is one not within her department while also explaining to the hooded ramen person that they could, in fact, purchase that much ramen, but not at the self-checkout, please. Izuku arrives home before his mother. His new companion is looking around the apartment, and he waits a moment before opening the door to his room. All Might stares down at him from every corner, along with other heroes. That's how he knows it's home, he supposes. His phone buzzes, and taking a look he discovers that it's Shinso. He's asking about the cat. Izuku rubs the cat's head as he texts back, smiling at his snarky answer. He was not expecting the loud banging at his door at all, let alone so soon after that message. Opening the door, Izuku is met with Shinso, of course. He barely gives a nod to Izuku before he's cooing at the cat, brushing the sides of its face. This continues for a few minutes before Izuku is confronted with direct eye contact. "Show me your purchases. I must ensure this cat is getting properly spoiled, so I know whether to steal him or not." Izuku answers with a surprised, "Him," before showing him to his labeled room. Midoriya Inko walks in on the pair arguing over whether the catnip mice or feather teasers are better, with a cat curled on the floor between them. Izuku gains a new pet, at the cost of half his savings going towards a deposit required by the apartment manager for pets. Shinso and Izuku join forces to decide on a name but are unable to come up with any. So they call Aizawa. He doesn't pick up. Inko has no ideas either. Truly a tragedy. It's not long after the discussion that Izuku jolts up, a mere inch from decimating Shinsu's jaw. Before the purple-haired teen can question what caused the near miss, Izuku is running to his room, slipping slightly on the floor. Shinso has more questions than answers, but is distracted by the pressure of the unnamed cat spilling into his lap. Rummaging can be heard from Izuku's room, and Shinso leans back in an attempt to peek into it. He only manages to lose balance, crack his back, and slightly inconvenience the feline claiming his legs. Izuku is soon to return, holding up a folded blanket victoriously. It is soon to be unfolded and spread across the floor. He gestures for Shinso to pass the cat, but the cat passes himself, walking over and slumping against his arms. Whilst Izuku leans back to observe the cat on the blanket, Shinso unfolds his legs and rolls closer. Examining the tag practically brushing his nose, he lets out an overly dramatic gasp. Is this one of the cancelled, void blankets? Izuku can hear the lazy excitement in his friend's voice, and smiles as he sees the air quotes. "Yeah, I got one before all of them got recalled from stores. The reason for shutdown was the creator's quirk, right? Something weird chemicals?" Izuku's eyes glow, and he leans forward, hands in front of him keeping him balanced. The designer for these had a quirk that could color any textile but had the drawback of having a random number of uses go wrong in a row. They said that they could control it by making one use spectacularly horrible, condensed radiation bad, he explains, voice surprisingly clear despite how fast he's trying to speak. But to do that they had to keep track of how many times they used their quirk. They managed to figure out that they could do at least 50 good uses in a row before the drawback kicked in. More importantly, the designer had the idea to make a color darker than Vantablack, or as close to it as their quirk would allow. Shinso nods along, interested in the story. "They lost track this time though?" he says, motioning to the blanket. Izuku nods. "They got to over 60 blankets in less than 2 minutes due to a machine their company set up. Allegedly, they fell asleep with their hands still in the machine. Over 7,000 were made and shipped out before reports started coming in. In trying to replicate the Vantablack look, their quirk manipulated the fibers in the blanket in the same way. Only when it went to add the color, it caused a strange reaction. Nobody can figure out what exactly happened either. It was classified as a whole new chemical." He takes a few gasping breaths, coughing. Shinso slaps him on the back, doing his best to help. "So why'd you bring out your hella rare blanket?" he asks, once Izuku has somewhat corrected his oxygen intake. Izuku grins, teeth showing with the size of it. "Take a look at our cat friend." Shinso does, only to jolt at the lack of mentioned feline. He reaches out, patting at the blanket where he was last seen. "Where?" Shinso asks before gasping at the feeling of warm fluff. Orange eyes slide open slowly, shifting to gaze at the cause of the interruption of their rest. Pupils shift from annoyed slits to rounder ones, their camouflaged body rubbing against Shinsu's hands affectionately. Izuku's eyes haven't left Shinso, and readily meet his gaze when he turns back to him. He reenacts his grin from earlier, though with fewer visible teeth. "That's why. I believe I have found a name for our cat." Shinso nods absently, looking back to the now-named cat. He looks back to Izuku after a second of thought. "How will you know if there's cat hair on the blanket?" Bakugo can hardly believe how fast things had changed. It's already the last day of his time at Aldra, and no one is bothering the previously quirkless nerd. Despite the theory that Izuku's quirk is as bland as his appearance, everyone is still cautious. Late quirks were no joke in power, even the dumbest extras knew that. He glances back to Izuku, who looks relaxed for the first time in years. Izuku is writing in a fresh notebook, one clear of burns and water stains. Looking closer, Bakugo notes that it's not the same brand as all the others. The second thing to give away that it's a different notebook is Izuku's expression. Instead of a concentrated one, Izuku is smiling, eyes looking glassy. He may not care about Izuku, but he cares about the notebook. Bakugo hates not knowing things. Izuku is not writing. He is drawing, and he is drawing his cat. The caption of Void rests above the sketch, a small space hero, 13 posing next to it with their quirk activated. A content smile is ever present on his face, even when he messes up the eyes on Void and has to redraw them. Shigaraki cackles quietly behind a pair of binoculars on a nearby roof. The greatest of name choices, truly. He does admit he likes it, and its origin as well. Shigaraki had one of the blankets, too. An urge suddenly surges through him. He wonders if he can sneak into the apartment housing the cat without disintegrating the window. But alas, he sends a message to the League's group chat, as requested, notifying their emo that he had guessed correctly. Shigaraki curses loudly as he can while being on a stealth mission, realizing he owes Dabi a good handful of his pocket money. Izuku has yet to get over instinct, he realizes as he's speed walking to the school gate with Bakugo behind him. He nearly passes out when he hears the voices of Bakugo's friends. Izuku doesn't catch much, but apparently they want to go to the arcade. Bakugo nearly declines, but he bursts into furious cursing at the news that someone beat his high score on the skee-ball machine. Izuku knows which one they're referring to exactly. He was there to witness Bakugo's happiness at the explosion theme of his favorite game. His score has gone unbeaten for 3 years straight, if Izuku remembers correctly. He wonders who managed to beat it. The familiar crackle pops and smell of burnt sugar force his feet faster, and Izuku is grateful that the arcade is the opposite way of his route. He doesn't think he can handle half-running the whole way quite so soon. Shinso stands in front of a claw machine within the arcade Izuku had offhandedly mentioned in one of his notebooks. Every few minutes, he peeks over at the explosion skee-ball machine. The directions flash for a few moments, before the highest score flashes across the slim screen. Where the once title of Die had been, the new title of Cat sits. Shinso can only hope that his smugness translates through the name, along with his score being about 700 over the old ones. He's just about ready to leave when the bell at the door rings pitifully with the force put into the activating of it. A blonde stomps in, eyes set on the skee-ball corner. Shinso has to turn away and press a hand to his grinning mouth. This should be fun to witness. Izuku is minding his business, already past the underpass from the attack. He's feeling happy, warmth flowing through his limbs. Be it his quirk or the contentment gained from his new companions, he's not sure, but he appreciates it nonetheless. The feeling is overpowered by a sudden chill. He jerks his head up from where it had been watching the ground in front of his feet, stopping to look at the person in the middle of the path. Viridian meets Vermilion, dusty turquoise greets bright pine, and 2 pairs of red shoes face each other. Izuku takes one look at the man in front of him and knows something is wrong. It may be his frame, the visible scars. But Izuku knows something is off. And despite the dangerous aura the man produces, and all the news stories warning against it, Izuku takes half a step forward and speaks. "Are you okay?" The already heavy silence of the street seems smothering, without the response from the hoodie-clad man. Izuku's stomach is fluttering nervously, or maybe it's his quirk. Seeing as he hasn't seen a quirk specialist despite his late bloomer status speeding up the wait, he can't yet be sure. He keeps his eyes on the man, but avoids full eye contact in his nervous state. His phone chimes loudly from his pocket, either the usual reminder to not get distracted or a message from Shinso. The man in front of him shifts slightly, in a suppressed flinch sort of way. It only manages to pull Izuku's curiosity further from its self-conscious cage, and he leans forward on instinct, trying to observe further as he would a hero fight. The moment of observance and reserved shock is broken by Izuku's phone violently ringing. Izuku flails, startled. He looks over to the man after gazing at the caller ID and speaks apologetically. "Oh, I'm sorry, but I really need to take this call before my friend worries," he says. "But if you can wait a few minutes, I'll talk to you as soon as it's over." His voice crackles slightly on the last word, and he nods to himself reassuringly before finally answering the phone. Shigaraki is in shock. Even with Kurojire's barely repressed mother henning and Sensei's strange reassurances, neither of them had asked that question before. He can only stare at his target in disbelief, frozen for the moment. The street is silent, the distant sound of busier roads distant in the small bubble they seem to have made. It's broken soon enough, the bubble, when Midoriya's phone rings. Shigaraki can only grow more incredulous as the boy apologizes for not wanting to worry his friend, telling a total stranger that he'll still speak with him for the cost of a short wait. He does not know how exactly someone like this exists, but Shigaraki suddenly has a revelation that he could probably just ask to see the cat the boy adopted. Shinso waits patiently for Izuku to pick up, grin starting to ache. He leans against a brick wall, not at all far from the arcade. The perfect angle to see through the glass door, and back to the skee-ball corner where a particularly explosive blonde is visibly fuming. Izuku picks up just in between the third and fourth ring, with a somewhat quiet, "Hello." Shinso returns the greeting before filling his friend on his current project. So the explosive blonde is wasting all of his money in the arcade currently, courtesy of yours truly. The skee-ball title is now ours, and I don't think illegal Quirk use man is gonna reclaim it for a while. On the other side of the phone, choppy sentences and sputterings dominate for a good few seconds before Izuku manages proper speech. You beat Ka-dash." He cuts himself off before restarting all over, in a slightly calmer, but no less amazed disbelieving tone. "You beat Bakugo's score on the skee-ball machine? He's had that title for 3 years, Shinso." Shinso snickers. "I know, you wrote that down in a notebook wondering if he used his quirk to cheat. Not important. The title is now ours, and I doubt he'll be able to even connect it to us, if what you've told me about his complex is correct." Izuku's response is an exasperated iteration of his name, and he purposely drags out the O. Shinso laughs harder than he knew he could. After making plans that weekend for Shinso to visit Void, they both bid farewell at the same time and hang up. Izuku turns back to the hoodied figure, looking sheepish and excited at the same time. Shigaraki's senses were above average. He hardly needed a quirk for that, all it took was anxiety and training. As such, he picked up on most of the call. He isn't sure what to think, but he's a bit jealous that Midoriya's friend will likely see Void again before Shigaraki even meets the cat once. That thought process was cut off by the return of Midoriya turning back to him, looking strangely enthused. "So, sir, what did you wish to talk to me about? I can guess that you were waiting because your hood is up and there's a high chance of rain today." The last bit is barely above a mumble. Shigaraki would be impressed if the reason for his hooded appearance didn't have another use. He's almost worried for the kid's naivety. His voice is scratchy, like most of his look, he knows. Shigaraki is almost curious if it'll be what scares Midoriya off. "You're almost correct." The shorter boy tilts his head, slightly nodding for Shigaraki to continue. Izuku, of course, knows that the blue-haired man is likely at least some kind of thug. He isn't as naive as many believe. If the scars and mostly covered face didn't give it away, then his voice would be what tipped Izuku off. The purposeful half-deadpan was near reminiscent of Shinso, but there were intimidating undertones, almost like a fairly annoyed teacher. Only, it wasn't of the scolding type of intimidation, but the aggressive kind. He honestly should be more scared of what could happen to him, but Izuku is reassured by the comfortable burning in his veins. Should anything happen, Izuku's quirk would likely be a trail, leaving a melted trace wherever he touched. For that reason, he doesn't flinch when the man speaks again, louder this time. "I'm the leader of an organization. We're looking to recruit people who want to change the world for the better, even if it means destroying heroic society. You caught our attention, late bloomer." The man looks directly at him with red eyes, but Izuku can tell they're different than the ones he's well acquainted with. He doesn't nod this time, but the man continues. Our main goal is to kill All Might, he says bluntly. If we do so, society will be forced to see how corrupt it is. And if it doesn't? He chuckles. Then I destroy the things I and the League don't like. Shigaraki admits that leading that strongly would probably scare away any teenager, especially one that grew up in a hero-worshipping state. He's prepared for Midoriya to lash out, maybe rant a bit about how amazing All Might is. Instead, his tenseness is wasted. Midoriya doesn't even look angry, more so considerate. He's pondering if the muttering is any hint. Shigaraki is about to bark out a snarky question when the teen waves at him in a signal that either means, go away, or wait one goddamn second. Either could be reasonable in this specific situation. He watches as Midoriya swings his bag off his shoulder, pulling out a notebook from its banana-yellow confines. The teen flips through to a bit past the middle, and Shigaraki notices the stains and burns even with the pages being rapidly flipped through. It's a curious sight. Shigaraki doesn't have time to question where the pencil came from before the street is filled with the sound of graphite on paper. Izuku doesn't know why the impulse kicked in now of all times, but he gives into its pull as usual. He writes fast, the first few lines filled within moments. The only obstacle is drawing bullet points and trying to keep them neat. Izuku has yet to even add a title, with half the page already filled. The eyes of the man in front of him are on Izuku, but he doesn't care, surprisingly. Instead of the usual vibe of annoyance he gets from his peers, the feeling he picks up from the kind of hovering man is some kind of approval. It's strange. Before he can truly process it, 2 pages are filled, and he's looking up to initiate eye contact. Which is also strange, but makes sense since the man is just a somewhat stranger. Scanning over his notes real quick just to be sure, he turns his notebook for the man to see. Shigaraki doesn't know what he expected. An elaborate prank, maybe? All he knows is he was not expecting, on any level, to receive a perfectly logical rewrite of what he described. But more legal, and considerably better than causing worldwide panic, if one were to think about all the screaming that would occur as a result. Shigaraki hates screaming, or loud noises in general, he's not too sure. Screams are really his only current frame of reference. What Midoriya has detailed on the page is a Stain-esque point of view, but also not. It takes the concept of exposing fake heroes and changes it to corrupt ones that usually slip through the filter. Stain's filter, even. It also, surprisingly, includes ways for people with aggression to stay under control whilst also causing slight havoc and contributing. Shigaraki approves. Killing people is satisfying sometimes, but it still is loud and messy. 2 things he knows he should be used to, but hates nonetheless. Not being part of his own plans is even worse. Midoriya's plan is neater, and includes video games as a bonding activity. And that's not considering the fact that this may help the League bond together better, as a good majority of the major members are Stain fans. A genuine smile creeps through Shigaraki's forced mask. Izuku watches the man carefully, noting the raised fingers as the others brush over the pages. He doesn't miss the smile that looks almost out of place on the man's face, but also more natural than any other he's seen so far. When their eyes meet this time, Izuku nearly flinches. Up until recently he'd only seen that look from Shinso, one of impressed awe and appreciation. Before Izuku can awkwardly ask the man what that look is for, he's sliding his hood down and holding out 4 fingers in a handshake gesture. And before Izuku can stop himself, his thoughts pour out like ink onto a tissue, rapidly and messily. A 5-point contact quirk, likely lethal if my theory of his occupation is correct, it may affect the user, hence why he may hide his face as it could be recognizable from such effects. Izuku cuts himself off forcefully the moment he realizes what he's doing, years of learned impulse snapping his jaws shut to stop the flow of words, lest he risk burns or the loss of yet another workbook. His lucky streak is truly non-existent. He can't help but think. Izuku catches the tip of his tongue in his teeth. Shigaraki almost thinks his quirk has activated, eating away at his hoodie, with how fast Midoriya's mouth shuts. The teen's whole face scrunches up, and he ignores the impulse to embarrass someone lower than him, if he were to quote Sensei. He almost panics as Midoriya irrationally expecting a cloud of bloodied dust to be expelled. Blood is spit onto the pavement, but there's no dust, and Midoriya sticks out his tongue to poke at the damages. He winces immediately on contact. "Are you okay?" Shigaraki asks, unintentionally mirroring the boy's first question to him. It's a rare gesture of concern that he long thought had died along with his family. Midoriya coughs, once, twice, before he nods. "Yeah, just bit my tongue, as you can probably tell." His speech is off, in a way only someone with a hindered tongue can speak. Shigaraki nods, and holds out his hand again. Izuku stares at the hand for a moment, suppressing the urge to verbally analyze. He manages a pained grin, and reaches out to shake the man's hand. "Shigaraki. My first name doesn't matter at the moment." Sensei had warned him some people may guess it's a scrambled version of his original name, so he'd taken to only saying his last name in an effort to please him. First name is said in a weird tone, Izuku notices. He shakes his head. He hasn't earned the right to Shigaraki's backstory yet. "Midoriya Izuku, though I'm pretty sure you already know that." Shigaraki still looks impressed, giving a slight nod. He motions for Midoriya to follow, and for the first time since their meeting, Izuku hesitates. He looks back to him before sighing, more at himself than anything. "There's probably some kind of health boost back at the base, come on. I need to show your ideas to the rest anyway before they drag you back themselves." Izuku relaxes at the explanation. This incredibly reckless, he thinks, as he falls into step almost right beside Shigaraki. He shakes off the hesitation. If he can help someone achieve their dreams, no matter how kind of villainous they or their dreams are, in a safer way than they may have been planning, then he will. Lecture for coming home late be dmed. Izuku had nearly done something incredibly reckless to prove he could be a hero, quirkless. He was lucky the situation ended before he could get involved. And with Bakugo's dreams contradicting his behavior, Izuku had experience in seeing the true meaning of someone's goals. Even though Bakugo doesn't particularly count in that regard. Seeing as he yelled his reasoning every day for years to rub Izuku's face in the often rocky dirt. His hesitation is shoved away, like a lost ice cube under a fridge. Making sure Shigaraki didn't do something bad was his top priority. Despite his recent realizations of how irresponsible and near neglectful the man could be, he still saw how important All Might was. Maybe a few fewer years of fanboying and a few less pieces of merch would have made him more bitter. Izuku shakes his head, brushing the curls trying to assault his eyes away. He could ponder over that later. Right now, he needed his focus to be on his possibly new friend. Shigaraki is waiting by an alleyway up ahead, foot tapping a rhythm just fast enough to qualify as impatient. Izuku scurries to catch up, and gently bites down on his sore tongue to keep from spitting out unneeded admirations for the dark purple oval that appears, mist floating from it. Questions later. Keeping someone on the right track now. He walks into the warp gate, only lightly cringing at the coolness. His notebook is held in one hand, note page marked with his index finger. Izuku can only hope that what he's written is enough to influence Shigaraki for the better, overpowering whatever or whoever gave him the idea to cause so much harm. His eyes open on the other side. Shigaraki does a quick sweep over the bar, relief that it's somehow still in one piece flooding through him in the few moments before Midoriya steps out beside him. Besides the official members, there are a few tables occupied by the usuals and a few partial league members. The pair receives a glance from everyone, all but the official members quickly looking away after. Toga bursts forward from her perch on a bar stool to greet them, the stool audibly rattling in its barely nailed-down glory. The story behind the reasoning for such a precaution would have earned a smile, if Shigaraki didn't have a reputation to hold. There were cameras too, so he couldn't risk that much of a slip here. Toga circles them, likely searching for the ever-possible sign of blood. She soon returns to the front of them, baring her feline-esque teeth widely. "So this is the late bloomer you were asking Jiren about?" Her head tilts slightly as she studies Midoriya, teeth quietly clicking when she speaks. Shigaraki nods absent-mindedly, most of his thoughts focused on figuring out if Toga will declare Midoriya a target. The last time that happened, they had to fasten down the stools so they wouldn't be used as weapons. Other present league members have wandered over by now, Dabi's shadow towering slightly over Toga even with a good few feet between the two. Spinner is lurking off to the side, and Kurogyri is cleaning a cup by the nearest side of the counter. Compress moved over a stool from where he was earlier. Twice is missing along with Magna. Toga gets closer holding out an obvious handshake. She's the second to introduce herself. Toga Himiko. I'm the League's stealthy undercover agent person. Her voice is near a shout, but Midoriya doesn't seem to mind, besides a slight wince. Midoriya accepts the handshake after self-consciously wiping his hands on his breathes. He hasn't even said the first syllable of his name before the other members are crowding in, introducing themselves. Izuku is overwhelmed. Never before has he been so enthusiastically greeted, especially by so many people at once. He can feel the blush on his face through the fuzzy feeling of amazement. Everyone's hands are as different as their greetings, Izuku notes. Toga's hands are only the smallest amount smaller than his, and the palms are rough. Likely from holding knives, is the glint from her sweater pocket is any evidence. There are only a few scars from them, it seems. Her greeting was the most energetic of the group, flooded with excitement and warm welcoming. The smell of copper clings to her. The man with purple burn scars comes forward next, patting Toga on the head as she moves to let him into the primary position for a handshake or something similar. Izuku wipes his hands against his breathes again. Name's Dabi. Is all he provides, but it's enough. Dabi's hands are warmer than his, and even with the limited contact a fist bump allows, Izuku feels like he let the faucet run on hot a bit too long before touching it. A fire quirk, he thinks, and likely a powerful one. The fake name is also a hint to such, and Izuku wonders what color Dabi's flames are. He nearly physically shakes his head to focus, but decides to just bite at his tongue as a substitute. Metallicness tingles on his taste buds, and he sees Toga sniff at the air before setting her golden eyes on him. Izuku avoids eye contact like a child who stole a cookie. Dabi steps back and motions the lizard man forward. He almost looks as nervous as Izuku feels. Spinner. His introduction is quick, as is his handshake. Spinner's skin has an interesting texture, like softened sandpaper. Izuku has so many questions, but he forces them down along with a small gulp to dispose of oozing from his tongue. The other two near people introduce themselves from afar. Compress, says the one on the nearest bar stool, drawing out his name with a slight dramatic flair. His mask is interesting to Izuku. He throws the curiosity of its meaning to the back of his mind, with the rest. Izuku fixes his gaze on the bartender, near vibrating with the need to release his questions. Only one more introduction, and his own, he reassures himself. Shigaraki still lingers to his left. You may call me Kurogyri. At the tone of the Mistman's introduction, Izuku immediately sends an apologetic look. Kurogyri is obviously the responsible one of the group. Shigaraki stays standing beside Midoriya, if only to ward off the lurking drunks. He really doesn't want to mop blood out of the flooring again. He's close enough to feel the heat radiating from Midoriya, and he glances over at Dabi. The scarred member's eyes have yet to leave the newest presence, and if one were to look closely they would catch the faint wisps of blue flame flaring off his arms. Midoriya practically explodes as soon as the introductions are over. I'm Midoriya Izuku, and oh my god, I have so many questions. But first, could I get a tissue or some water? Either works. The boy actually looks sheepish to ask for something so simple, and shakes with poorly concealed anxiety. Shigaraki cannot believe such a person exists. A person who can ask an obvious criminal on an empty street if they're okay, but gets anxious asking for water? Amazingly absurd. Izuku balances his notebook on his arm while he waits, writing down all his questions in an attempt not to forget them. He knows he won't, but it's better to be safe. The scribbling presses at concealed bruises from last week, but Izuku ignores what little pain manages to break through his haze of focus. He doesn't see who hands him a glass of water, but he accepts it, sliding his pencil behind his ear to do so. Izuku scans over the wobbly written questions as he sips the water, mentally marking off the ones he sees written down to make room for the ones that aren't. Once he's drank half of the cup's contents, He secures it in his pocket without much thought so he can grab his pencil. At the sound of suppressed laughter and a half-snort, Izuku freezes. Shigaraki hovers over Midoriya's shoulder to see what he's writing. The boy, either caught up in the process or just uncaring, doesn't seem to acknowledge it. Kurogiri passes a cup of water to Compress, and he passes it onwards. Shigaraki holds out the glass to Midoriya, and he accepts it without a word. Everyone reacts in some form of amusement when the boy avoids wasting any time by sliding the glass into his pocket. Dabi makes a strange noise, somewhat a chuckle and somewhat a snort, and Midoriya freezes mid-sentence. That doesn't escape the notice of any of the surrounding members. Toga is the first to realize why exactly he had frozen. "Oh, Midoriya. We're not laughing at you, don't worry. It's the pocketed cup that we're laughing at, not you." Her hands flutter towards him and back multiple times. Shigaraki remembers her telling them about the bullying she endured when she still went to school. Midoriya looks up just enough to scan over everyone before he relaxes. A relieved sigh wheezes out of him. Shigaraki walks forward a few steps, and only has to shift a foot to be facing Midoriya. "So, are you going to ask your questions? We need to get to that plan of yours too." He snaps fully from whatever daze he was in at the question, and nods once he'd processed it. Izuku turns to Shigaraki first, and feels hesitation creeping up again. He squashes it down violently as he asks the first question of many. By the time Midoriya reaches Dabi, who he'd seemingly saved for last, everyone is impressed. He had guessed every quirk he sought to ask questions about successfully, getting scarily close to the actual names of them or coming up with even better ones. At multiple points throughout the questions, Shigaraki considered renaming his quirk to something such as Molecule Melter or Dust Age. Midoriya would be a great quirk counselor, multiple people say during their questioning. The boy in reference blushes every time. Even Kurogiri had stopped working, immersed in the boy's analyses of how the members could use their quirks better or more safely. Dabi had taken a seat at the bar at some point, whilst Midoriya had barely moved from where he first appeared. As such, he walks over to the bar, silently asking if he can sit there. Both Kurogiri and Dabi gesture to the open stool closest to him. Midoriya has to hop a bit to get onto the seat, so he sets his notebook on the counter before getting onto the stool. Kurogiri moves to stand on the barstool side of the counter, peering at the notebook as Midoriya cracks his joints yet again. Dabi joins in the observing, head whipping over to look at the green-haired teen beside him. "You've gotten this much on me just from my appearance?" he asks incredulously. Izuku hums happily, drowsy on all the praise given to him in such high quantities in a short time. "Do you have some sort of mental quirk?" Toga asks as she scrambles to get up onto the stool on Izuku's other side. He hums again, before realizing that's not an answer. "Not sure yet. Haven't even seen a quirk counselor since it developed, and I haven't used it since." Izuku slips his index finger in between the question pages before flipping to Toga's page. He adds a note next to the previous ones about her teeth, before starting to draw out a rough sketch of her jaws. He messily adds, "probably sharp as knives," and connects it with a line pointing at her canines. "It's likely some sort of pyrokinesis," he says before flipping back to the question page. It's Dabi's turn to hum as he nods, looking up from the notebook to Izuku. "Yeah, Jiren said something like that too. You melted a wall and can hold molten materials." Izuku rubs a thumb over his own knuckles, letting out a quiet, "Yep." Katsuki cannot beat the newest high score on his skee-ball machine. Kat had completely dominated over his previous score. The classmates that had followed him left earlier, not willing to risk becoming the target of his aggression. He runs out of money an hour before the arcade closes. As he's heading out, a flash of purple hair across the street catches his eye. The teen from the hospital. He waves at Katsuki, before disappearing down an alleyway. Katsuki runs after him, something absolutely vicious on the tip of his tongue. He inhales as he skids into the alley, fully prepared to waste the breath to insult the purple onion. The breath escapes, instead, as one of confusion. For multiple more streets that line up with the alley and others, there is no one. Shinso perches on top of the roof of the convenience store to Bakugo's left. He huffs out a laugh into his scarf, and watches Bakugo be a confused idiot for the next 5 minutes. Shigaraki sits at the bar, a faintly amused expression on his face. The rest on the main league members surround Midoriya, who has a concentrated wrinkling to his face as he holds a green flame on his palm. Dabi shoots out a small burst of fire curiously, and the even tinier flame flares forward suddenly. Both fire users watch in awe as Midoriya's flame absorbs Dabi's. Toga shouts enthusiastically, encouraging Midoriya to try controlling the blue flame. Dabi provides another burst, and it washes over the other's hands. None of it stays, it simply flows off of Midoriya's hands, strangely water-like. So I can't control fire I can't produce, he states before puffing out another lick of flame to his hands. Ironically, it looks like he's attempting to warm his hands. The green flames stay close to Midoriya's skin, slithering over it and twirling around his fingers like yarn. Thin bursts stray from the main cord but quickly extinguish. With a curious look on his face, Midoriya allows the flame to float away from his hands and into the air. This time, it stays stable. It looks like some kind of noodly dragon. Toga points out, green reflecting strangely in her eyes. At Toga's comment, Midoriya's fingers twitch and the fire takes on a more dragon-y form, small flames flickering into whiskers and horns. You have good control, for just getting it, Dabi remarks, flicking a string of blue up into the air to mimic Midoriya's green. Toga jumps in her excitement, and Midoriya's hand jerks to make his dragon JRK up towards the ceiling and away from the girl's hair. Midoriya's phone buzzes, and the flame freezes. He slowly pulls his phone out and turns it on. A quiet, IF dashed, somehow manages to echo in the bar. I really must be going, Mom is starting to worry. He turns to look at Shigaraki, frowning. Sorry that I forgot to share the plan this time. You could probably catch me around the same spot tomorrow, but I'll give you my phone number just in case. Before Shigaraki, a villain, can tell a hero-worship-raised child to not just give his number to strangers, Midoriya's already ripped a strip from his notebook and written it down. He holds it out to Shigaraki as he shoves his notebook into his yellow backpack. Shigaraki gingerly takes it, holding it with 2 fingers. Upon seeing that, Midoriya perks up. I almost forgot, he says, snapping his fingers. If you wear gloves you wouldn't have to worry as much. I know a few brands that make them for 5-point quirks. I'll send you a link or 2 later. Shigaraki still cannot believe this kid exists. After saying his goodbyes, Kurogiri opens a warp gate for Izuku to leave through. He smiles back at them and steps through, only shivering at the icy sensation this time. Izuku walks in on a crime scene. One man holds another against the wall by his throat, electricity causing the pinned one to twitch. A woman picks through a dirted bag, tossing aside clothes and a couple of books. The woman is the one who spots him. Just as he's fully stepped out of the gate, he feels a sharp pain in his leg. A loud bang echoes in the small alley. Izuku has barely figured out what the hole in his breaths mean when he's shot in the arm. On the other side of the warp gate, Dabi and Toga chat about what they think the plan Midoriya mentioned is. Kurogiri waits a few seconds after the red shoes have vanished to close the gate, just to be safe. Everyone in the bar flinches at the barely muffled sound of a gunshot and look around for the source. Another shot is fired, and a red shoe reappears as though Midoriya took a step back. Shigaraki speedwalks the short distance over, reaches out and pulls the teen back into the bar. The force he pulled with is enough that Midoriya tumbles backward. Midoriya falls onto his back, balance non-existent. He lays stunned for a few moments before speaking. Fancy meeting you guys here, he remarks before going limp. Toga rushes over, pupils dilated to the point of roundness. He's bleeding. Looking down, everyone besides Toga notes that, yes, there is a pool of blood slowly spreading from Midoriya's leg. His arm twitches, and Shigaraki can see red through the hole in the fabric. That's precisely the moment when the panic fully kicks in. Toga, surprisingly, is the one who takes charge to calm her fellow league mates. Shigaraki had been a hair away from dusting the slip Midoriya gave him, and all the others were fluttering between staying with the injured teen or going to help Kurogiri retrieve medical supplies. Dabi, in particular, was close to a panic attack and needed Toga to reassure him that, yes, Midoriya still had a pulse. Kurogyari is quick to return with the first aid kit, as he always is. He and Toga are the ones to tend to the passed-out Midoriya, with Dabi advising them here and there. The uninvolved members were either hovering or running about to bring in spares for the spares. Shigaraki was one of the hoverers, taking note of the severity of the bullet wounds. The few customers that had still been present run out when he starts verbally planning brutal revenge. Even Kurogyari agrees that they should track down Midoriya's attacker, and he was usually some form of reason. Shigaraki took this to mean that this revenge in specific was logical, for which he was glad for. Dabi and Shigaraki had only just dipped into the idea of melding the assailant to a wall by their skin when Midoriya stirs. He catches the end of Shigaraki's sentence, of such detailing making someone pay. Midoriya's face crinkles disapprovingly, eyes still shut tight against what little light is available. No, don't do that. Shigaraki meets Dabi's gaze, and returns the slight smirk before asking, and why not? Midoriya's eyes barely open, but he manages to stare down Shigaraki. Because that'd be mean. Especially killing them, that'd be pretty rude. He trails off, blinking as much as he can. He reaches into his brief pocket, withdrawing his phone. Midoriya squints at it, trying to zoom in on the home page. His sad attempt of reading ends with him frustratedly huffing, before motioning around. Can someone? His brow crinkles, eyes looking slightly glazy. Can someone please message my mom and tell her I decided to sleep over at a friend's house? If she asks, say it's a new one. Izuku is barely coherent, he can tell. His vision is blurry, despite the lack of tears in his eyes, and his limbs feel numb. He knows he should be feeling pain as he was shot, but it's not there. He's guessing it's drags. After Shigaraki takes a moment to study Midoriya's texting style, he sends the requested message. The boy's mother responds with enthusiasm, near begging to meet this new friend soon. It feels strange to say goodnight to someone and be called sweetie in return. He's not sure why, but he ignores it after a few minutes. By this point, Midoriya had been moved to a cot, a sleeve and breathe leg mutilated to reach his injuries. Both sites are heavily bandaged, and Shigaraki audibly lets out a sound of relief when he notices no blood leaking through yet. Dabi is crouched upon a metal folding chair next to the cot, diligently watching over Midoriya. Shigaraki snickers at him as he pulls up a chair of his own. Shinso has a feeling that something is wrong, quite wrong, but that's rather normal for him. He ignores the strange tug in his veins and continues sipping at his steaming tea, despite the dread creeping up his spine. The next time Izuku wakes up, he immediately knows the drags or whatever the League had given him wore off. His arm felt like it had just been jabbed with a needle for a blood test of vaccination, but 10 times worse. That's a gunshot all right, he thinks, slightly prodding at it. Izuku shifts to lay on his side and is gifted with a flicker of resistance from his injured leg. He groans when he realizes he can't lay on either of his sides. Morning came too quickly, Izuku can't help but think. Sure, he was thankfully allowed to stay overnight with the League, but school is still a few days from being over. He could get away with skipping the last few days, sure, but that would raise suspicion. Izuku would prefer it if heroes didn't get to the League before he could at least try his hand at getting them closer to the right side of the law. And so, awaking to a snoozed alarm, Izuku panics. Kurogyari is an early riser naturally and probably would become one if he wasn't. Whilst most of the League sleeps in late, he still has the habit of making breakfast early, in case of an early mission. All of them know better than to go out on empty stomachs, now at least. As such, he is surprised to hear rushed footsteps at such a time. Enter Midoriya Izuku, who propels himself around a doorframe, stumbling doing so. He's muttering up a storm, frantically searching for his things. Midoriya pauses only at the scene of an oval stain on the wooden floor of the bar, only a few paces in front of the entrance. "Is that mine?" he asks in an alarming blank tone of voice. Kurogyari startles at the question, nearly dropping the yellow bag that he had grabbed from under the bar. "Yes, that stain is from last night's incident." Kurogiri expects a quiet acknowledgement at most, and decides on replying with a questioning of how he's feeling next. Wow, that looks like it's gonna be hard to get out. I'm sorry, I've read that blood is horrible to get out of things. Nearly dropping the stack of plates he was then pulling from one of the wall shelves, Kurogiri spins to look at Midoriya, eyes scrunched up incredulously. You are sorry? For nearly bleeding out on our floor after being attacked. Midoriya looks up from the ghost of the puddle, smile weak and sheepish. Kurogiri finally understands why Shigaraki had been muttering about how impossible the teen is. Izuku spots the bag on the counter and shifts on his feet, happy. He moves forward to grab it but is stopped by a flickering purple-black hand. Looking up, he meets Kurogiri's eyes nervously. May I please have my bag? The ever-appearing smile most describe as sheepish makes a return. Kurogiri shakes his head. No, you may not. Not yet, I mean. Izuku's head tilts curiously without his permission. You need to have breakfast before you leave, and the others would likely like to see you off. You're forgetting that I can warp you to your school. The last sentence is said with light mirth, and a narrowing of yellow eyes. Izuku feels like he's being scolded. Glancing down at his phone, he realizes that he does have quite a while yet, teleportation assistance or not. He lets out a sigh of relief, and melts down over the bar counter. His shoulder twinges with the movement, and Izuku is reminded again of his metaphor. Peeking around Kurogiri, he can spot a toaster in a small side room that can't be much bigger than his closet. Izuku knows the smell that drifts over fairly well. Waffles! Kurogiri turns to look back at him, giving a fancily worded yes. Izuku nearly snickers, the wording reminding him of a pre-Quirk movie he had found a few weeks ago. Izuku pulls his bag over, frowning at the small dotting of red-brown on one of the straps. He moves on from it, leaving it for future him to deal with. Instead of pulling his notebook, he pulls his extra credit workout to check over. By the time Izuku is greeted with the sound on ceramic beside him, he's halfway through the math packet and had only found one error, of which was writing an S instead of a 6, amusingly. He barely looks up from the packet to thank Kurogiri, and has to pat around for a moment to find the plate. Crunching on the provided waffles, Izuku discovers that they're blueberry. He hums in appreciation. Shigaraki is awoken not by Kurogiri, but by the sound of Dabi stumbling into the wall. Not very surprising, he especially had stayed up late, worried that Midoriya might catch a fever. He himself was also worried about the possibility, of course, but had managed to go to sleep at the reasonable hour of 2. Shigaraki lazily pulls on a pair of purple plaid pajama briefs and a rumpled hoodie, thumbs tucked to his palms the whole time. His door creaks sadly, and he cringes at the loud noise. The league members from the previous night are all waiting by the steps, seemingly for him. Toga is bouncing in place, and bounds over to him once he's fully out of his room. Come on, Handman. Mito has to leave for school soon and he'll leave before we can see him off if we don't hurry. The endings of both sentences are drawn out dramatically, a common thing for Toga. She's clad in a hoodie as well, but yellow opposed to his maroon. Toga manages to grab the sleeves of most of the group, doing her best to drag them down the narrow stairwell. Midoriya looks up, waffle in his mouth, to see Twice faceplant just as he reaches solid ground. A startled, "Are you okay?" is comedically muffled by Blueberry Waffle. Dabi bursts out laughing first, having to crouch down to ensure he doesn't meet a similar fate to Twice. Toga starts giggling next, and that leads to a mix of amusement and coughing. Shigaraki just provides a singular chuckle. Kurogiri sighs painfully as he walks around the bar to check on the down Twice. Izuku is the only one not laughing, and he only shrugs to himself before swiveling back to his work. He lifts a hand to steady his breakfast, a loud crunch announcing the continuation of his eating. It takes a bit for Toga and Dabi to calm down, but they eventually slide into the seats on either side of him. "Whatcha doing?" Izuku's gaze flickers to his left momentarily, to Toga. "Oh, I'm finishing up some extra credit for my math class. I don't really need to do it, but I thought I might as well to be careful." Dabi chuckles good-heartedly. "Bragging much?" Izuku just about throws himself off his stool with how fast he turns to reassure Dabi. No. Of course not, I didn't mean it that way dash, he blurts out, all the while shaking his head back and forth rapidly. A hand from behind him steadies his head before he can give himself whiplash. Calm it, analyst. He was just teasing you, be careful not to irritate your shoulder. Izuku doesn't need to turn to know it's Shigaraki, and he deflates rapidly. His head is lightly pushed down as Shigaraki peeks over him to look at the packet. Algebra? That stuff's fun, I suppose. Toga gasps. Handman? You like algebra? She sounds betrayed. Shigaraki's hand retreats, and Izuku is able to turn around. He shrugs as he stretches, somehow. Not the best, not the worst. It only gets worse from that point on, Spinner chipping in on Toga's side as well as Dabi. Izuku is pulled away from watching the back and forth by his phone. Opening it with a quick typing of numbers, he's greeted with a message from his mom. A simple, quick one wishing him a good day at school. So simple, yet it makes his heart feel ready to burst. His mom is great. He's only able to savor the feeling for a beat, before the context hits him hard. Midoriya jolts, rushing to shove his work into his bag. He looks around for Kurogiri before he leaps from his seat, startling the discussing quartet. Sorry. I just realized I really need to get going for school now. Kurogiri makes his way back over to the bar, walking around Spinner to do so. He waits patiently as Midoriya is sent off by all of the present members. Dabi and he share a fiery fist bump, both pouting a bit at how Dabi's blue is easily overtaken. Shigaraki gives him a few less than legal pain pills and a glass of water, waiting for him to take them before giving the middle schooler a hug. Toga is next to attack, tackling Midoriya with very little restraint. Dabi, in fact, has to catch the other fire user before he falls over. Twice and Spinner take after Dabi's approach, though lacking the fire. Midoriya and Kurogiri only share a polite nod. Izuku nearly walks through the portal before Shigaraki points out that he should probably change his uniform jacket and breathes, seeing as both have sleeve or leg tattered. He sighs before pulling out the spares. The day passes far faster than Izuku was expecting, but he can hardly complain. He exchanges a few memes with Shinso as he walks home, and when he opens the door to the apartment, his mom isn't there. Working late again, likely. Izuku feels a mix of disappointment and relief. Disappointment on one hand because he missed his mom, no matter how short the time he'd been gone. Relief on the other because he's pretty sure his bandages have bled through if the stickiness of them against his skin is any kind of hint. His uniform sticks to him for a moment as he's pulling it off for a shower, and oh boy, laundry. He'd completely forgotten about laundry. Smacking his hand against his forehead, Izuku backtracks to his room, pulling his tattered uniform out of his backpack. He balls it up and tosses it under his bed to fix later. A disgruntled mew comes from under the bed and he crouches down to give Void an apologetic chin scratch. He nearly forgets to plug in his phone too, but plugs it in after Void so helpfully reminds him so by trying to chew on his charger. Izuku nearly leaves the room without a change of clothes and spins harshly on his heel seconds before he does. He snatches a set of clothes from his closet and thinks, wow. I've been forgetful today. Void huffs at him as he leaves, and Izuku lightly flicks the cat's ear before providing more affection. Once in the shower, Izuku learns two things. 1. The suspicious painkillers the League had him take had worn off. 2. Hot water really hurt gunshot wounds. Or maybe it hurts all wounds, he's not sure. Either way, the wounds sting like a motherfucker. Cold water isn't much better, but Izuku sighs and works with it, lightly shivering. He comes very close to saying F- loudly when he gets shampoo in the bloody hole in his arm. The soapy water at his feet is tinged pink, but he doesn't worry about much but maybe staining the porcelain. The feeling from last night has yet to stop bothering him, Shinso notes as he gets dressed for school. It follows him to school, through his classes and all the way home. It's a relentless feeling, pulling at his anxiety and curling around his throat to choke him. His distorted meow of a ringtone snaps him out of it, at least partially. Shinso half-heartedly snatches his phone off his nightstand, turning it on to peek at the notification. Izuku. Izuku had sent him a trio of memes, all obscure and faintly existential. His favorite kind. The sending memes back and forth, and eventually Izuku's stream halts. This usually happens, but usually only for a few minutes, as Izuku opens the door to his apartment and gets out of school clothes. 10 minutes or so later, Shinso works up the courage to send a curious "you good" in their chat. He's probably just taking a shower, he tells himself. When Izuku hadn't answered 20 minutes later, the feeling that had been dulled down by his happiness came back full force, slamming into Shinso like a truck. He's just taking a long shower? 40 minutes later, and Shinso had worked himself into a panic. Subconsciously he had gotten up and begun to pace, getting further worried by the moment. He sends another message. No answer, not even read. Completely done with the annoyingly persistent feeling, Shinso pulls on a yellow jacket, grabs his keys, and heads out. His shower had been far longer than usual, Izuku can't help but notice. He'd already pulled out the first aid kit from the cabinets under the sink, and he pulled himself up onto the counter beside it to tend to his leg. It wasn't pretty. The bullet had luckily gone completely through on both occasions, and Izuku was willing to bet if the wound hadn't already had time to heal, he might have been able to see the floor through the hole in his leg. He held a cotton pad in one hand and rubbing alcohol in the other. Izuku knew they had hydrogen peroxide somewhere, but hadn't found it in the kit itself or under the sink, so this will have to make do for now. Carefully holding both things over the sink, he slowly turns the rubbing alcohol, trying not to spill it everywhere. Once the small stream he allowed had soaked the pad, Izuku closed the bottle, setting it aside. He recoiled slightly at the smell, but ignored the sharp scent in favor of cautiously bringing it down to wipe at the nearly perfect circle of a wound dug into his leg. The moment it touched the scab, Izuku's leg jerked and an involuntary hiss came from him. His arm pulls back stiffly, and he tries to psych himself up and get the cleaning part done before his mom gets home. He doesn't want to worry her. Izuku mentally bargains with himself, offering himself things. Maybe a tiny bit more ice cream than you usually scoop out of the tub if you just do this. You can pick up some chocolate bars or something tomorrow if you just get this over with, and other such deals. It doesn't really work, but it makes him laugh at himself a bit and forces him to think of how silly the situation is. He finally just slaps the cotton pad on the wound and forces himself to deal with it. Wiping at it is much harder, but he really would prefer to not get an infection in either wound. Technically he has 4 to clean, and he groans as he imagines having to do this 3 more times. Only a few more swipes later, he deems the entry wound for his leg clean enough. Getting at the more ragged exit one is far more challenging, forcing him to either twist his body into a pretzel to get at it safely or to sit down where it's a bit more of a health concern. He doesn't doubt that the floor is clean, with his mother's cleanliness, but he really does not want to risk it. Izuku grumbles to himself before propping his leg up on the counter and twisting his torso to see it better. He flips the cotton pad to the fresher side and re-begins the process. Absurdly focused, he doesn't hear the sound of the front door opening, nor the calls for him. The knocks on the door also escape his focus. He doesn't even notice the bathroom door is open until he catches one of the torn edges of the hole and accidentally tosses the reddened pad in surprise at the resulting tug. Izuku looks over to where he threw it, by the door, and notes the unusual shadow it's covered by. He hums in confusion before looking up. Shinso and Izuku meet eyes. One set belonging to a boy wearing a tank top and shorts with 2 lightly bleeding bullet holes and with one leg awkwardly propped up on the bathroom counter, and one standing with a bloodied cotton pad at his feet looking very confused and very concerned. Not for the first time that day, Izuku mentally curses. Oh shit.